I wanted to thank you for joining. I appreciate a couple admin things to get started. We have with Ashley Owens with operations. We have Major General Gronsky on board as well. And if you can, please note to mute yourself. Also, it'd be great to see the video if you're on video to kind of come in. But make sure to mute yourself. We are also muting everybody and administratively as well. We are going to take questions in our chat box and then address the questions throughout the event at the end of the event. So again, welcome everybody. Alex Cherchowski, founder, director of Greater Philadelphia Veterans Network. And our mission is to make Philadelphia one of the best destinations for vets for economics and jobs, leadership, and business as well, kind of the life cycle of the veteran. Really work with our veterans to make sure they succeed in many capacities, and as well as other programs that we do that can be found on our website. Now, again, I've been hearing some background noise. I appreciate it. Thank you for going on mute, everybody. When you please join us. If you're new to this, it's important that we keep ourselves on mute with our speaker, plug it, and then we'll do questions in the chat box. So we do these programs. This is our second program as we're doing during kind of COVID-19. We had our first speaker a couple of weeks ago talk about resilience, and Ralph Galati, Air Force veteran, POW, who's local to Philadelphia region, recounted his story about achieving success through adversity. It's pretty challenging in our times right now, but as he did as a POW, that was in itself an experience that we can't even understand. So he shared that with us as we're kind of thinking through where we are today more than ever of our military experience. And I want to welcome also those that are patriots, civilians, and everybody on this Zoom meeting, but speaking to the entire community, but also in our veteran community as well, is we look at our background of skill sets that we've learned in the military and what has made us successful. And there are ups and downs, and more right now is challenge times of everything that we need to do. And one of those related to our speaker today. So the topic for today is really important because we are all in a different role right now. The topic is leading during a crisis. And if you think about it, you're a leader with your family, you're a leader with yourself, you're a leader at work, and you're a leader in multiple areas of life. So I think it's important to understand the relevance of leading during a crisis. And I want to kind of share with you a little bit of our guest speaker and his background of where he's coming in. Just bear with me 1 second. I'm going to pull up one of our slides, and that's going to be talking about our speaker. All right, I appreciate your patience, everybody. Is it kind of a little technology? Okay, here we go. So our speaker today, when leading during a crisis, leaders must make difficult decisions. The reason these decisions are difficult is that the information available to make these decisions is in most cases imperfect. The level of risk is generally very high. Leaders must become comfortable with making difficult decisions because doing nothing may not be an option. So our speaker, Major General retired John Gronsky, commanded a brigade of 5,000 soldiers and Marines in Ramadi in Iraq in 2005 and 2006. At that point during the war, Ramadi was known as the most dangerous place on the face of the earth. In an uncertain and volatile environment, John was forced to make life and death decisions that had not only tactical but strategic consequences. This was a time before counterinsurgency doctrine had been developed, so the playbook for these types of operations was thin, requiring the brigade to develop tactics, techniques, and procedures during the execution of combat operations. From his personal experience in this chaotic situation, John will discuss how he and his fellow leaders were able to make critical decisions and lead soldiers while maintaining an aggressive yet character-based based mindset that conducting counterinsurgency operations and destruction. Much sought after speaker and leadership seminar facilitator, and he will share his thoughts about leading in tough situations. General, Major General, I'd like to thank you for your time and turn it over to you.
Okay, Alex, thank you very much for that introduction. And let me just do a sound check with Alex and Ashley. Is the audio coming in okay?
Sounds great, sir. You're good to go.
All right, thank you. Just want to say how much I enjoyed Ralph Galati's talk a couple of weeks ago. I had the good fortune to be able to listen in. I personally got a tremendous amount out of that. So Ralph, I think you're part of the team that's joining tonight. Thank you for that great message that you provided to everybody. Really, what I'm going to try to do this evening for the time we have together is really facilitate thought. So if anyone has any questions or comments that Alex or Ashley would want to bring to my attention during the course of what I'm going to be saying here, I'm okay with being interrupted. And of course, at the end, if anybody has comments, questions that we could have as part of the discussion, that would be great. But again, it's all about facilitating thought for this time we're in right now. You know, as Alex mentioned, I commanded a brigade in Ramadi, Iraq in 2005 and 2006. I actually had about 3 days notice before finding out I was going to be commanding the brigade. Was a National Guard brigade, 2nd Brigade, 28th Infantry Division. And the brigade had been mobilized and was at Camp Shelby, Mississippi for a few days when the brigade commander who was down there had a physical issue. He just wasn't going to be able to make it through the processing, the medical processing. So I was asked on a Sunday if I could be down there on Wednesday, and I was honored to be able to do that. So getting down and taking command of the soldiers who were on the ground at Camp Shelby, and then eventually about 5 months later going over to Iraq with them was kind of like how we got hit with this coronavirus crisis. It was, for me, it was unexpected, but it was still probably a little bit different than what we're experiencing, because for me, it was something I really relished doing, simply because it was an honor to command those soldiers and Marines. It was kind of a pickup team, be quite frank about it. I was training with soldiers down there at Shelby, and then when we got over to Ramadi, when we actually got in country, there was an active duty infantry battalion there in East Ramadi that had already been there for several months that became part of my task organization. And then the same thing happened with a Marine battalion that was there. So wasn't necessarily training with the team that you went over there to actually conduct operations with. So that was a little bit different. It was a violent time there, just kind of, set the environment for everybody. Tremendous amount of roadside bombs and improvised explosive devices there. Sniper fire, rockets, mortars. I mean, you didn't have to go outside of any of the forward operating bases or any of the other sites that we had set up throughout the area of operation there, always at risk of getting killed. So, the soldiers and Marines had to live with that risk every day. Unfortunately, we did have 82 of our soldiers and Marines killed in action in the 1 year we were there, and we also had a little over 250 soldiers and Marines, and of course the Navy corpsmen who were with us, wounded seriously enough to be that they had to be evacuated back to the United States during our time there. This virus is called the novel COVID-19. Novel means something we've never seen before. When I was over there, it was the first time I had been to combat, so it was a completely new experience for me. I would say most of our soldiers and Marines were in the same boat for the most part. And again, it was a different environment because up to that point, we had been training for large-scale combat operations, of course, until 9/11, and then we had to transition to fighting a counterinsurgency, and that was before counterinsurgency doctrine was written, because the counterinsurgency doctrine that we now have wasn't written until 2007, and as I mentioned, we were there in 2005 and in 2006. And I remember after being there about a month, and I did do quite a bit of battlefield circulation there, and I remember being there after about a month or so, and myself and the platoon that was with me, we did go through several improvised explosive device attacks there, just like most patrols did. And I remember me and my platoon leader looking at one another, and we kind of said, it kind of hit us at the same time. We said, people are actually trying to kill us. And, that was kind of just kind of a weird feeling to have, to know that, hey, there's actually people out there trying to take our life. And I think, some people are going through that now, whether it is for health reasons, or whether it's for financial reasons, that, hey, there's something out there trying to change the way we live. So we all have to deal with that. I think three of the things I tried to do in this really volatile, uncertain environment as I was commanding this brigade in Iraq, I think three themes was, purpose. I really felt like I had to communicate purpose to the soldiers and Marines who were in the brigade. An offensive spirit, not a heavy-handed spirit, but an offensive spirit, a spirit of us seizing control rather than having the feeling like we were being controlled. And then also a focus on success. So we had to take stock of the successes that we had during the time there. And, a lot of people talk about the time we're in right now being Groundhog Day, and I kind of have that sense, even though we're doing slightly different things through the course of the day. But if we're working from home or whatever the case, a lot of these, most people can't even remember what day of the week it is. So it's kind of like Groundhog Day here. And that was one of the issues over there too. You could fall into the sense of Groundhog Day, like, soldiers, Marines getting up every day, doing their mission every day. And it was hard to feel if there was a sense of making progress or not. So I'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. But in terms of providing purpose, I just felt that since we were over there and the environment was very, very dangerous, soldiers and Marines were losing buddies, either being killed or significantly wounded, if not on a daily basis, certainly on a weekly basis for sure. And it was necessary that these soldiers conduct themselves in accordance with our military values and American values, so we wouldn't get heavy-handed with these Iraqis while we were having these attacks occur and losing people, constantly. So I thought providing a purpose and making sure I articulated that purpose regularly to the soldiers and Marines was extremely important. And I had to come up with a very, very simple line that anybody could understand. And really the purpose that I came up with, and I asked my subordinate commanders to communicate, and what I would communicate any chance I had whenever I was visiting our soldiers and Marines, was the reason we were there in Iraq was to prevent terrorists from attacking our families, our friends, and really all Americans, whether we knew them or not, back home here in the United States. So that was the purpose I articulated to them. And it was an invisible enemy over there, very similar to what this COVID-19 is here. A lot of people talk about COVID-19 being an invisible enemy. To an extent in Iraq, and I know it was, from what I hear, different in Afghanistan. I had I hadn't been to Afghanistan, but I think it was a little bit different there. But in Iraq, at least at that time frame, the enemy was very invisible because most of our attacks were mortar fire, rocket fire, primarily though improvised explosive devices. And it was these IEDs would go off, and some of them were subsurface. And when a subsurface IED went off underneath a combat vehicle, usually it meant somebody died in that vehicle. But you were never able to really see anybody. You know, you were never really able to strike out at anyone. So it made it very, very difficult. So I thought that purpose was necessary. And then also to articulate to our soldiers and Marines the fact that, you know, we couldn't be heavy-handed. And we realized that many of the Iraqis, you know, that we would deal with, you know, during the day were insurgents at night trying to kill us. So, you know, it was a natural tendency for a meat eater, you know, for somebody who's aggressive, you know, to want to be heavy-handed with these people, because you figured, hey, you know, you might be out there trying to kill me or my buddy later on. But the message was, hey, you can't be heavy-handed, because it was really important to treat these Iraqis with dignity and respect, in order to try to, you know, just tamp down the insurgency there. Because there's an old saying, there's no fighting your way out of the insurgency. So it's really, you know, how do you treat the local people so they start understanding, if they cooperate with our force, you know, things are essentially at some point in time going to get better. So it was really talking to them about that. I remember a day, it was September 28, 2005, a pretty bad day, where we had 5 of our soldiers who were conducting a patrol down in a section of Ramadi known as Tamim. They were in a Bradley fighting vehicle. And we had really just taken control of a combat outpost down in that area where the brigade before us never had an opportunity to venture down into. But we took control of a combat outpost. We set up a combat outpost in that area. It was an area that very seldom any U.S. troops before us had gone down into, and it was on a railroad bridge. And these 5 soldiers in this Bradley fighting vehicle were patrolling down in that area, and a subsurface IED, improvised explosive device, that had probably been buried in the ground for at least a year or so, detonated underneath their Bradley fighting vehicle. And, you know, all 5 soldiers were killed instantly. And it was a really traumatic experience for the battalion. That was the lower level unit that these soldiers were part of, because these 5 soldiers were all from the same region in northeastern Pennsylvania. So it was devastating. We knew how devastated the people back in northeastern Pennsylvania were going to be, because, I mean, five soldiers from almost the same hometown back there. And then, of course, losing 5 soldiers in one attack like that was just devastating to the morale of the soldiers, not only of that battalion, but of the entire brigade. So, you know, just talking about offensive mindset, because I had a sense that because of that attack and the fact that in September, you know, this attack occurred on September 28th, we had 15 of our soldiers and Marines, 15 killed in action in September, and another 12 killed in October. So that was 27 of our Marines and soldiers killed just in September and October alone. That was 33% of all the killed in action we had. So it was a really critical point there where, hey, I knew we were going to be serving there at least until the following June. So it was not the time to go back on one's heels. And I just knew we had to have this offensive mindset. So I got with the battalion commander, and you know, the next day I talked to him and I said, you know what, this is what we have to do. I said, I need your battalion to set up a cordon and search operation in that area in Tamim. And the whole purpose of doing that wasn't necessarily for the tactical value of doing that. The whole purpose of doing that was so that battalion commander, his staff, and his soldiers, that happened to be an Army battalion, felt like they were taking control of the situation. Because the worst thing is when you feel like you have no control. And so, in situations like we're going through right now, many of us might feel like we have no control. We have no control of this virus. We have no control of the fact of, how our business is going or how our financial situation might be. And I know some are better than others, but some are worse than others. So it's really, really important that we realize that even though there's a lot we can't control, there are certain things that we could control. And so it's important that we evaluate, hey, what things could we take control of, and then do that. I think that's an extremely important lesson. And that's why I got with that battalion commander and explained that, hey, you have to set up this battalion level operation. And that was mainly to just set the conditions in the minds of his soldiers that they were taking control of the situation, and they just weren't going to accept the fact that they were being controlled every day when they were just going out there like Groundhog Day, patrolling one day after another and never knowing when they were going to get attacked. The other story I just want to share, and this is almost kind of like a humorous story, but I guarantee you it's true. And I talked about how, it was an invisible enemy to a certain extent, and how many of the Iraqis who were, working during the day, and it's not like there were a lot of economic opportunity while I was there, virtually none, but for the Iraqis who were working during the day and then perhaps conducting insurgent operations at night. And I was getting a briefing from my intelligence officer, my operations officer one morning, and the operations officer mentioned to me that our soldiers were able to detain a high-value target who was known as the Butcher of Ramadi. And, I was asking the operations officer and intelligence officer, like, why was this guy called the Butcher of Ramadi? Is it because of, the blood he had on his hands of innocent Iraqis, or blood of American soldiers and Marines he had on his hands? Why was he called the Butcher of Ramadi? And my intel officer told me the reason he was called the Butcher of Ramadi is simply because he owned a butcher shop. I mean, and that's true. And it was kind of, and that's the other thing, in crises and difficult situations, when you're leading in difficult situations, having a sense of humor is not a bad thing. And so that was kind of a little bit of comic relief there. But the point I'm trying to get at is the need for all of us to stay true to our character, stay true to our core values, even in difficult times. And no matter what type of organization we're leading right now, whether it's leading our family, leading a business, leading a team within a business, maybe we're a teacher. I mean, whatever the case might be, whoever we're leading, those people are watching us, whether we know they're watching us or not. So remaining true to our values, remaining true to our character is extremely important. And another quick story that really gave me pride in our American military over there is Governor Mamoun was the governor of Al Anbar province, and Ramadi was the capital of Al Anbar province. So, I mean, the governor was right there in the town that we were conducting operations in. So he was a guy that I engaged regularly. And I'd go into his office. He'd always have this entourage of his there. He'd always have probably about 20 sheikhs in his office, and get in there and just kind of have this dialogue with them. And he was always kind of on the fence about supporting our American military operations there, but he wasn't totally against it. So he was a guy we felt we had to protect. And there was a point where he had to have a medical procedure conducted. So since Ramadi was so chaotic and dysfunctional, we had to send him to Baghdad to an American medical treatment facility there, a military treatment facility. And he was gone for about 2 weeks. And when he came back, he sent a message that he wanted to see me. So I went over to the government center. And normally, like I said, he had all these sheikhs and his entourage in the office. He asked everybody to leave. The only 3 people in his office was the governor, myself, and my interpreter. And he sat down alongside me, and he actually took my hand in his. And that, when an Arab takes another man's hand in their hand, that's a sign of trust. And he said to me, he goes, you know, Colonel Gronsky, he goes, many times you've sat in my office, you've told me about American values, you've told me about the values of your Marines and your soldiers. And I never really kind of believed you or never really knew what you were trying to tell me. He goes, but I was in Baghdad at this medical treatment facility that your military ran there. Because I saw with my own eyes a wounded insurgent being brought into the trauma center. And I saw how hard your American medics and nurses and doctors worked to save this insurgent's life. And he said, I couldn't believe how hard and how desperately you Americans worked to save the life of one of your enemies. And he said, now I know what you were trying to tell me about American values. And so the point is, in situations like this, where, you know, things are, you know, kind of uncertain for sure, difficult with our families, with our jobs, with normal things that we had been used to doing in our life, you know, staying true to our character, staying true to our core values is very, very important. And that's something I tried as I led that brigade in Iraq, as I mentioned already a little bit earlier, really tried to have our soldiers stay focused on. The other thing is, and again, I'm just trying to equate and think back to the chaotic, difficult situation in Ramadi and how it could kind of make sense to what we're dealing with now. And one of those things is a phrase that I heard the other day, ride the wave of change. And when we were in Iraq in 2005, like I said, counterinsurgency doctrine didn't really exist at that time. I mean, there were some books out there that I made sure I read even before going over there that had to do with historical examples of how counterinsurgency operations were fought effectively, and then how some mistakes have been made in the past. But there was not really any doctrine. So while we were over there, you know, we had to form our own and develop our own doctrine. It was like discovery learning. And I think it's the same thing here. It's like discovery learning for a lot of us. You know, this whole virtual meeting, virtual webinar situation is like discovery learning. You know, how we deal with those that we lead during this time when maybe we can't have face-to-face contact with them, but we still got to reach out to them. We still got to check on them. We still got to make sure they're doing okay. With our families, you know, the kids who are used to being in school this time of year. And for those of you who have seniors in high school, you know, those seniors aren't going through the normal functions and celebrations that they normally go through. So it's just really trying to develop things as we go. And the best way I dealt with that is just seeking counsel from my subordinate leaders and my staff. And that's what I suggest to all of you. I mean, we all have people in our network that we trust, and absolutely, you know, reach out to folks we trust, you know, talk to them, you know, just get their suggestions on how they are dealing with things. And, you know, just use what they're saying in a way that if it makes sense in your situation with your job or with your family, you know, absolutely use it. And the other important thing, we tell soldiers and Marines this and other military personnel all the time, you know, because of the suicide crisis we have in our country, especially with veterans, that, hey, if you need help, don't be afraid to reach out to somebody and ask for help. You know, and that could be help dealing with something as simple and mechanical as how do I use this technology to do something that I want to do, or it could be something you're struggling with your family, or it could be something you're struggling with yourself emotionally. And it is very, very normal for people to feel emotionally challenged right now, or feel anxious, or have anxiety. Just the other day, I said to my wife, I said, this is just not a good day for me for some reason. It's just one of those days where things seem pretty tough. And over there in Ramadi, it was the same way. There were some days over there that seemed really, really tough. And I remember some mornings in Ramadi when I had a chance just to be alone and maybe be outside. And it might have been just a gorgeous morning. And then that feel, how when you have a nice day over here, a nice, gorgeous weather day over here, you kind of feel good about it. And I could feel good about that for about 5 seconds over there, because then I kind of remembered where I was and remembered that probably one of my soldiers or Marines would either get killed or wounded sometime within that day, or latest the next day. And I thought to myself, can't even enjoy this weather. So again, just thinking about the emotional strain that your friends and family might be going through, and be sensitive to that. And then also being sensitive to what you're going through, and don't be afraid to reach out to people and ask for help there. The other thing I learned as a commander over there, truth and integrity are everything. And really just facing up to bad situations. And, the days where we had somebody killed, or worse yet, when we had a bad shoot and killed an innocent Iraqi, or other things that happened. I'll tell you, there was this day in early January. It was January 5th, 2006. We had a terrible incident occur. And I'll just tell you a little bit about leading up to that. In January 2005, 6 months before we got there, they held elections in Ramadi, and they had about 3% participation in the election. And then as we conducted our operations starting in July of 2005 and leading up to the elections in December, we had about 80% of the people of Ramadi vote in those December 2005 elections. So about 12 months later, we went from about 3% to 80%. So we felt great about that. We felt like we were turning a corner, making some progress. And I was talking to the governor, and we decided, we needed to run some recruiting events for the Iraqi police. And I made a big mistake. We conducted this recruiting event at the glass factory in Ramadi. And on January 2nd, it was the first day of the recruiting event. We had 200 people show up. Up to that point, we usually had about 3 or 4 people show up to a recruiting event. So, we had 200. We were ecstatic. Like, wow, the sheikhs are finally cooperating with us. The imams are cooperating with us. The second day, we had 400 people show up to the recruiting event. We couldn't believe it. We realized we turned a corner. The third day, 600 people. I'm not exaggerating. The big mistake I made is I decided to conduct a recruiting event a 4th day. And one thing when you're dealing with a counterinsurgency, you never want to do anything 4 days in a row, because there's, the insurgents are out there watching. And on January 5th, we had a suicide bomber detonate their vest at our recruiting event, killing about 100 Iraqis, maiming many, and killing one of my best friends, Mike McLaughlin, who was a lieutenant colonel, and also one of our Marine dog handlers, Sergeant Can. And they were both killed there by that suicide bomber. Some of our other soldiers were wounded, thankfully not too seriously, but just a lot of emotional trauma from that, and the number of Iraqis who were killed. And that really turned the sheikhs against us, because the sheikhs were intimidated after that. It was hard for us to make a lot of inroads after that. So, the reason I'm telling the story is, you're going to have setbacks like that. But when we had the setback like the one I talked about back on September 28th, where 5 of our soldiers were killed with one roadside bomb, and then this one on January 5th, which was a horrific suicide bomber destroying the recruiting event. You know, you gotta do what you could to bounce back. So the thing I did is I called our guys together the very next day. I told them that nobody has to look to blame anybody for what happened because I was taking the responsibility for it. And I meant that sincerely. It was totally my fault. And we talked about how are we going to improve things for the next time, because we were scheduled to have 200 Iraqis come back to the glass factory a week later so we could put them on buses and ship them to the training that they had to go to. And so we revamped the entire security situation at that glass factory, and we didn't postpone those 200 Iraqis coming back to get on the buses. We held it as it was scheduled. We improved the security based on the after-action review and lessons learned we conducted, and we drove on from there. So the point of telling that story is in these situations that we're in, we're going to face setbacks. We're going to face emotional setbacks, financial setbacks, just setbacks, you know, perhaps health-wise, but we're going to have to drive on with that. I see I got about 20 minutes left, and I do want to leave a little bit of time for questions if there's going to be any, but just a couple of other points that I want to cover here. So, you know, doing those after action reviews, and I think that something we need to look at, you know, as leaders of a family, leaders of a business, leaders of whatever organization we're leading, to think about, you know, taking a look at how we dealt with this COVID-19 crisis and conducting some type of lessons learned, like I said, for our families, for whatever organization we might be leading, to talk about, hey, what things did we do well during this crisis that we would want to do again? You know, what things didn't we do so well that we'd want to change next time? And then what lessons did we learn from that? And then the more important thing is, once we identify those lessons learned, how are we going to apply them for next time? And I could tell you with the operation, you know, a lot of people think these after action reviews in the military are only done after a training event. I could assure you that in operations over there, for the 1 year we spent in Ramadi, we did these after action reviews after operations, because we wanted to get better every time we went back out there. So again, just employing something like that, using something like that for our lives here, I think would be very, very important. The other thing I want to mention is, you know, as an officer in the Army, and again, at that point in time in 2005, I got my commission in 78, so I had been in the Army quite a while. And as most military professionals do, I did read a lot of history. And there are actually some lessons from history that I read that I actually applied when I was over there in Ramadi, and I'll just share 2 quick points with you. I read this book. The title of it was The Clay Pigeons of St. Lo. It was written by a guy named Glover Johns. He was a battalion commander during World War II, and he wrote this book, The Clay Pigeons of St. Lo. And one of the things he said in his book, he was a battalion commander over there, and whenever he would have to go from point A to point B, he would have his little command group with him. And he wrote in the book how one day he just decided, just for the hell of it, to go from point A to point B, and he had his command group with him, you know, his radio operator, a few other people on his staff, and some mortar fire came in and killed half of those people in the command group that were with him. And he kicked himself in the ass because, you know, he was going from point A to point B without a real purpose. And I kind of took that with me over to Iraq. And I thought to myself, you know, if I'm going to order a battalion to send a patrol somewhere, it's got to be with a purpose. You know, just to go into an area that we had never gone before, just for the hell of it, and having a soldier killed or a Marine killed or somebody wounded doesn't make any sense. So whenever we did missions over there, it had to be for a purpose. Now, that doesn't mean we didn't go into places that no one had ever gone in before. But if we did, it was because we're going to set up a permanent position there, a combat operational combat outpost or something. So, you know, as long as there was a purpose behind it, and this is going to sound crude to maybe some of you, but I understood the risk that somebody might die when we did things like that, but there had to be a purpose behind it. And I think it's, you know, we need to try to take that lesson here. But the point I'm making with this is because I read that in that book, even myself, and I did a lot of circulation out there with my personal security detachment, you know, the platoon that was providing security for me. And I only went places, and I went places a lot, but I had to know in my own mind that I was going somewhere, not just for a joyride through Ramadi, but because there was a purpose of me going somewhere, you know, to see soldiers, to see a situation, to talk to a commander, but there had to be a purpose behind it. Because if these soldiers in my personal security detachment platoon were going to be risking their life because I was going to go somewhere, if God forbid one of them got killed, I would want it to be for a reason and a good reason. Then the other thing I took from a book I read, and I read the book We Were Soldiers Once and Young by Hal Moore, and he talked how in a chaotic time, you know, in the Udrang Valley while he was in that battle, he had to go to a quiet place, and this one happened to be near a termite nest. At this one point in this chaotic battle, he and his battalion were engaged in. And just in terms of making a decision, he said, you know, he had to think of three things. What don't I know? What do I know? And what do I need to do to influence the action? So that's a real quick decision-making process. So I think when there's a crisis, when things are really chaotic, when things are coming at you from every direction, you know, what do I know? What don't I know? And what do I need to do to influence the action? Again, that's taking control of the situation and having that offensive mindset and that offensive spirit to take control rather than be controlled, I think is important. But again, that's two things I just got from reading history before I went over there. And of course, I had many other lessons that I won't go into. But the point I'm making is it's good to look back on history. You know, this similar incident like this pandemic happened in 1918. I actually read that book about 10 years ago. You know, it's good to look back on history and historical examples about how we could deal with situations. And, you know, when you look back at the economic crisis that happened in 2008, you know, again, as we're thinking as business leaders or entrepreneurs, you know, how could we move forward? I mean, 2008, Airbnb came out of that financial crisis. Uber came out of that financial crisis. So with every crisis we're in, if we could stop and think and use our imagination, we could possibly find a way to come out of this better than when we went into it. I mean, companies and people have done that before, so I think that's something to think about. Two other points that I just wanted to mention is, you know, followers are watching. I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but whether we lead a family, whether we lead a business, whatever organization we lead, there are people watching us. So we really have to understand the responsibility we have as leaders of whatever unit that might be, family unit, business unit, whatever, because there are people watching us. There are people counting on us to be calm, to be cool, and to be level-headed during a time of crisis, and we owe that to them. That doesn't mean that we can't have our own little meltdowns, but I think we need to do that kind of privately, and we need to do that maybe with some people we really could trust. And like I said, you know, everybody's going to need somebody to lean on now and then, even the leader. And then the other thing is, you know, over there in Ramadi, you know, I was friggin' scared a lot. And it's normal to be scared when you're in a situation like that. And, you know, people in this situation are anxious, and it's normal to be anxious. You have to understand what some of the feelings that you're feeling, if they're not feelings, you know, a lot of us are type A, positive, you know, a lot of times in control of the situation. This has really thrown us a curveball. So just understand that it's okay to be anxious. It's okay to be scared sometimes, but we just got to deal with those feelings. You know, we just can't let them take over on us. So those are some of the thoughts I wanted to share with you all from my time commanding that brigade in Ramadi. Hopefully, I was able to facilitate some thought in your minds. I don't think I really have any solutions for you necessarily, but my whole goal here is to just relive some of the experience I had over there, and hopefully get everybody thinking. So with that, I'll turn it over to either Ashley or Alex and see if there's any questions or comments from anybody.
Major General, thank you so much for sharing your story. I know we've known each other for a while, and you know, we talk about a lot of different things, and I appreciate sharing that. And through that, we've had some questions come in, and I want to ask you a couple based on some of the stories you shared. And I think it's relevant more today than ever. And we always hear the word adapting, I guess, you know, and it could be at any event you can go to, pre-COVID, pre-war, it's adapting. They talk about it at a lot of leadership events. And so maybe a personal experience, if there's one or two, you know, and advice you have is when you receive information and you planned, and then you have to pivot, which is change, right? Pivot is not mentioned a lot, right? It's pivot. How do you pivot as a leader? And then change and then adapt, right? So anything in particular you want to share about that? Because I think that's what's today more than ever is we're receiving info. There's no clarity in it. We don't know as a business. We're trying to lead in many different directions. So appreciate sharing your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'll share a couple of thoughts, and hopefully this will get at to what that person was asking or thinking. But, you know, when I first got over there, and again, from reading history, mainly about large scale combat operations and that type of thing, you know, I was always kind of in the mindset, again, going over there, first time in combat, that, hey, you know, civilians are going to die in war. So there's nothing we could do about that. And, you know, we kind of have to accept that. And I remember having some conversations with the governor and the sheikhs about, hey, guys, you know, this is a violent situation. Guess what? Sometimes civilians are going to die. And as I continued to adapt over there into this counterinsurgency environment we were in, I realized that for us to be successful in our mission, it wasn't okay for civilians to die. I mean, we had to do our best to limit the amount of civilians that died. We couldn't be cavalier about that. We really had to take that seriously. So I think just adapting in that way to the way I thought when I first got there, and then you know, as I just matured in my thinking after being on the ground there and realizing how could we really be successful here? It's not about not caring how many civilians we kill. It's about really being conscious of not doing that. So that's one way I'm thinking that I adapted my way of thinking over there. Another thing I want to share is, and this might help a little bit, I don't know, but tactical patience. You know, we hear that term, tactical patience. And what that means is you don't always have all the information coming in right away. And, you know, there's the old saying, first reports are usually wrong. And sometimes I always believe that a leader has to make, you know, incumbent for a leader to make a decision. And there's the saying that leaders dispel uncertainty through action. Leaders dispel uncertainty through action. However, it's being mature as a leader to understand that sometimes you've got to have a little bit of patience before you make the decision. You got to have a little bit more information come in. I remember, just a quick story. We had a patrol in a section of Ramadi. While that patrol was down there, there was another element down there, another U.S. element. It was a civil affairs team. And they were both down in the same area and didn't realize they were both there. And I had a battalion commander who had calling me because the patrol that was there was a troops in contact situation. And he had to get my permission to use a Super Cobra to fire on what he thought was an insurgent position. And he wanted to have me order the Super Cobra to fire at these insurgents who were on top of a roof where they believed the fire was coming from. Something just didn't seem right to me. And I just said, wait a minute, I'm not going to honor that request. We just got to let the situation develop a little bit more. And after a few minutes, we found out that the insurgent fire wasn't coming from on top of that roof. That was actually soldiers, a civil affairs team on top of that roof. And how about if I reacted quickly to that? We would have had a Super Cobra fire on a friendly civil affairs team. And I was just so happy I was able, it was a sense, you know, it was like a spider sense. And sometimes you just got to let the situation develop a little bit more before you make those snap decisions. The caveat to that is, hey, sometimes we've got to make a decision with less than perfect information, like you said. And I think, you know, it just comes with a little bit of wisdom and understanding, hey, this is about all the information I'm going to get, and I got to do something, so I got to do it. But then you got to be prepared not to just throw it over the wall once you make that decision. Then you got to be vigilant and see how things develop. And like you said, Alex, be prepared to call an audible or to pivot if you need to. So you don't have to be so married to your decision that, you know, come hell or high water, we're going to keep marching down the road because that's the decision I made. You got to be vigilant enough to know that after that decision, more information could come in, and you may have to backtrack completely. You may have to pivot a little bit. You may have to turn, but just being mature enough and humble enough to know that you may have to change.
So let's stay on that topic to do like a 1B on that, right? So if you think about it on the leadership level, you explained the pivoting aspect of what you did. Let's go a little bit more into the people behind all this, right? You got your command sergeant major, you got your troops. So, you know, there's the ideal of it. We're all human and we all pivot differently, and we're either frustrated, we're concerned, wherever, and there comes your team, right? So can you explain a little bit of kind of the 1B on this is, how do you know how well people are pivoting? How do you get them trained to pivot so they're in the mindset that there is change? And how do you communicate that from a command sergeant major, whoever, a high NCO on down to the troops?
Yeah, one thing I learned over there and then in other levels of command I had after that is, and I obviously everybody's had bad leaders too, or leaders that they don't want to emulate. I found that leaders who have a flavor of the month are not successful. In other words, a leader can't be changing their priority every month or every quarter. You know, a leader has to put out a vision with some good principles supporting that vision and then adhere to that. And that might sound a little bit, and that doesn't mean you don't pivot if you have to. We already talked about that. But what I'm trying to say is, don't be setting a different priority every month or every quarter. You know, there's some basic principles that you've got to adhere to with that vision you put out there. So it's really, and the other thing is, before you put that out there, whatever those imperatives might be, or those priorities might be, solicit the advice of people who've probably been around a little bit longer than you have. Like a sergeant major in the Army is going to be around longer than probably that battalion commander was around. Or as a brigade commander, that sergeant major is going to be there at least as long as that brigade commander has been in the Army. And then there's other people. Even if there's folks in your organization that haven't had as many years in, they've had different experiences than you had. So you've got to use that network of people around you. So I'm using, you know, I'm talking very military centric here, but in our civilian lives, you know, we all have people in our network. Some of them are a little bit closer to us, so call them trusted advisors who we should count on. And ask people if they would mind being a trusted advisor of yours, or, hey, you know, do you mind being a mentor of mine? It could be somebody with less experience, but they have experience, maybe more experience in one particular area. You know, ask them, hey, is it okay if I reach out to you now and then and pick your brain on this? So I think the point I'm getting at is, it's not just us being some, you know, wise, you know, great leader. We've got other people around us who have had other experiences or different experiences who could help us formulate our vision, formulate our thoughts, and help us make those type of decisions.
So I appreciate that, John, and you know, for the aspect of sharing with us of both sides of kind of an executive side and mid-manager and also kind of entry-level side of things. You know, you talked about finding purpose and, you know, and it's how challenging it can be. It can really be challenging as well, finding purpose. So, you know, while we're trying to get the news, and for example, there's the threat of and the realization maybe an open economy. Does that mean us? That means the business? You know, it's purpose. How do we find it? Maybe that's my new purpose, or what's the reality of my purpose? So how do we stay connected to just every day, you know, micro wins, stuff like that. And so we can figure out, you know, what is our purpose rather than feeling defeated.
I think, and that's one thing I don't think I spent time on that I should have, but enjoying successes. One thing I did over there is every month, this is going to sound maybe kind of corny, but we put out this like success card because every day over there seemed like Groundhog Day and you didn't realize the successes we were having. So maybe a success was finding, you know, 3 different caches of weapons. Maybe success was we detained, you know, 12 high value target, you know, insurgents this past month, whatever the case. But every month we identified what our successes were, because if you didn't take the time to really deliberately identify what those successes were, you were going to lose sight of them. And I think we have to do that in our lives now. Like every day we are having something that we succeeded on. You know, maybe it was, you know, something, maybe there's this paper, you know, we needed to read and we've been putting it off, and we finally read this article in this business magazine we were wanting to read. Or maybe it was teaching our kids to do something, you know, that we finally got a chance to show our daughter how to use an electric drill. I mean, whatever the case, you know, we have successes every day. Maybe it was going out and running 5 miles, you know, when I didn't feel like it. So I think we have to be good to ourselves and identify those successes, but then we have to be good to our followers. So take the time to point out to the family what successes the family has had the last week. Take the time to point out to your organization, whatever organization you're a part of or whatever organization you lead or a teammate of, you know, and identify what successes did the team make over this last week. There's always some type of success out there that we could identify. And that, I think, helps give us that purpose to continue to move forward. We realize, hey, it wasn't just a Groundhog Day or a Groundhog Week. We actually achieved something. And sometimes you really got to look deliberately for those things that you achieve to give that purpose in your life.
I appreciate that. One of our last questions that's coming in online is, you know, with a lot of uncertainty with the rollout, you know, that impacts the average citizen and businesses, you know, if you were going to provide advice, and not to put you on the spot, but if you were going to provide advice, you know, to our leaders, right, and they asked for your opinion, you know, what is the good way to bring us back? What is a good way to bring us back so we're all confident to go into this new cycle, the new phase?
Yeah, I'm very opinionated on this. I do. Hey, I'm in a good situation. Thank God I'm not suffering financially. I'm not making as much money as I could be making if this didn't happen, but I'm, you know, because of my retirement and everything, I am very grateful. But I know there's a lot of other people, either health-wise or financial-wise, that are suffering out there. I think our political leaders have to understand that. I don't think it's a point of identifying what businesses are essential or not, because every business is essential to that business owner. You know, that person who owns a barber shop, his business is essential in terms of feeding his family. It's not somebody up there at a higher level deciding what's essential and what's not essential. I think we got to look at what could businesses do to protect their employees and their customers. And if they could do that, then let them operate. I mean, in the military, we talk about safety constantly.
Constantly.
And one thing I was proud of is I had no soldier or Marine get killed due to a safety incident over there in Iraq. I was very proud of that because there's a lot of ways to get hurt safety-wise over there besides getting killed by the enemy. So safety. So if a business could operate safely And by that, I mean keep their employees safe from the COVID-19 and keep their customers safe from the COVID-19, I think they should be allowed to operate. I think if there's an essential business that can't do that, such as some grocery store where their employees just aren't following the rules or whatever, or the store isn't helping customers stay safe, hey, they shouldn't be allowed to open. You know, so it should be all about what businesses could keep their employees safe and their customers safe. That should be what we focus on. We got to be able to operate in an environment with this COVID-19 around us. We can't simply, you know, hunker down for months at a time here. There are too many people whose livelihood, their welfare, you know, the welfare of their family, feeding their family depends on this. And we can't depend on the government to just keep doling out money all the time, because even the money they're doling out isn't as much as people might be making in their job. So that's how I would handle it. That's
I appreciate that. And I know that, Major General, it's just a question from our audience. It's kind of for a leadership standpoint, and that's really sound advice. And, you know, it's still things to come. I want to thank everybody, you know, and I want to thank you, Major General, for your time on here. I want to share something with everybody of where to find us, you know, from this. Oh, actually, it won't allow me, but what we're going to do, and I apologize on this, I'm trying to share a slide with the information of where you can find us afterwards for the email and the website. Here we go. So here's some information from us, if you can see this, of where you can find us for Greater Philadelphia Veterans Network. Again, I appreciate I'm not the best techie in the world, and I'm just your host today. But Greater Philadelphia Veterans Network, we host these every 2 weeks on there. And our guest speaker today was Major General Gronsky. His business is Leader Grove, and he can be found at johngronsky.com. And again, please find out more about our mission with our organization, how to get involved. And please stay tuned as well for more information of our next webinar similar to this in the next coming weeks. Thank you, Major General, and everybody take care of yourselves, and please lead the way.